Hey everyone, time for an update on the happenings over here. February is a busy month for reptile breeders, so let me show you what's going on. It's February now, which means that it's late winter, and with springtime coming soon, I have to carry out the plans that I made for breeding reptiles this year. Plus there's the usual maintenance and feeding that I get to do. First of all, let me talk about what I won't be breeding this year, starting with Dumerils Boas. Cuddles has had 7 litters over her lifetime, but her 8th litter, which was last year in 2023, were all stillborn and some slugs. I don't know if this was because of her age or Moose's age. Or maybe it was that she didn't get warm enough during the gestation period. I don't know. But regardless of the reason, she went through a full baby production cycle last year, so I won't be breeding her again this year. For jungle carpets, I've got Jinx and Hans that are both from the 1990s. She produced a couple of times in the late 2000s, but when I paired her with males during the 2010s, she didn't produce. The only reason for breeding her would be possibly for preserving her VPI lineage in the hobby, but I don't want to risk hurting her for the sake of making babies, so she's done. The next group to consider would be ball pythons. Now this is an easy no for me. I still have babies from 2023 for sale, and I don't think it's right to be making more when I still have babies from the previous years that are up for sale, so there will be no ball python breeding for a while. The last group to consider would be Eastern Kingsnakes. LOL is 9 years old. She's beautiful. I'd love for her to produce babies. But if you remember, a year ago I learned that the male that I bought for her, Blister, has snake blister disease, and I took him to a reptile vet and he was started on his treatment. He was treated first with an antibiotic called metronidazole and also with Metacam, which is an anti-inflammatory to control any pain that he might be feeling. Then later the primary medicine used was voriconazole, which is used to treat fungal infections. This was used for 4 or 5 months. Once the treatment was over, I took him outside for a photo shoot in September, and he was looking really healthy. I got optimistic that he was cured and would be well enough to bring out of quarantine and breed with LOL. But just a few weeks ago, I looked him over again, and it's clear that the effects are only temporary. The veterinarian warned me that this would be difficult to eradicate, and it looks like she was right. So I'm scheduling another appointment for him, but my optimism for a healthy long-term prognosis for him is very low. So now let me talk about what I am pairing for 2024. First up are Ute and Tarzan. Tarzan's a jungle carpet python, and Ute is a jaguar coastal. She produced a clutch of 3 babies a couple of years ago when I bred them before, and I'm going to repeat the pairing. I sold all 3 of their previous babies, and then one of the customers sent me an updated photo of one of them just recently. And this snake looks pretty amazing. It would be really nice to just keep all the animals that get created here. Next up are Blizzard and Crush, my albino boa constrictors. She is 6 years old now, he is 7, and I keep telling them this is the time. These guys are ready. They've been paired together since sometime back in November. And I was pretty excited on February 9th when I found that she had ovulated. At least I think she's ovulated. She hasn't eaten in a couple of weeks before this picture was taken, and she looks like she ate a football. I don't know if this part will be interesting or not, but I'm going to break down the possible genetic combinations that can appear by breeding these 2 together. Let me start with Blizzard. Blizzard is an albino that is also anarthristic, and in the reptile hobby we refer to these as a snow boa constrictor. Now being anarthristic means that she lacks the red, yellow, and orange pigments that boa constrictors normally have. And when you combine that with albino, you get a snake that is generally a white color, but with a faint amount of pattern showing up. Crush is what we call a sunglow boa. This means that he's albino and he's hypomelanistic. Being hypomelanistic means he has reduced black. And another cool trait about him is that he is het anarthristic, which means he's carrying the gene for anarthrism, and when combined with Blizzard's anarthristic gene, the two together can produce babies that are also anarthristic. So here's what we know about the offspring that are possible from these two. 1/4 of their offspring will look just like mom, a snow boa that's albino and anarthristic. 1/4 of the babies will look like dad. They'll be albino and hypomelanistic and het anarthristic. But in addition to these, 1/4 of them will be just albino, but het for anarthrism. And finally, the last group, roughly 1/4 of them, will be albino and hypomelanistic and anarthristic. When these traits are combined, we refer to it as a snow glow. I don't make up the names here. I only have one more pairing of snakes this year, and these are the Bredl pythons that I have. The female, Carbonara, is 6 years old, and the male, Baconator, is 5. Both of them are hypomelanistic. This will be the first time I've paired them together, so we'll see what happens. I don't usually weigh snakes, but since I've never kept or bred Bredl before, I thought it would be interesting to weigh Carbonara. She weighs in right now at about 1,790 grams. Next year I will probably breed Dumerils boas again. I have some females that I'm raising up that might be big enough to breed, we'll have to see. The others that I'm hoping to breed next year would be the Chinese king rat snakes, the Papuan carpet pythons, the diamond pythons, and the Honduran milk snakes. Like I said at the beginning of this video, there's a lot going on right now. February is a very busy month. I'm going to show you how I manage all of the different husbandry practices that go into keeping and breeding reptiles year-round. I have to do this because I have so many different species from different parts of the world here. If I specialized in only carpet pythons or only North American kingsnakes, this would be a lot simpler. But instead, I have North American kingsnakes, pythons from Southern Australia, boas from South America, kingsnakes from China, pythons from Africa, boas from Madagascar. You get the picture. So let's see the picture, and by the way, be prepared for color overload. Many of the charts I'm going to show you have movement in February, so I'm going to show them to you so you know what I'm doing this month. Let's look at the carpet python chart for an example. First of all, notice that it starts in August. That's because for most species being kept in captivity in the northern hemisphere, things get interesting during the winter. The top section is for environmental things like heat, humidity, and lighting. The bottom section is for food and pairing males and females together. DTH stands for daytime high, and NTL stands for nighttime low. So this means that during the daytime, the temperature hits about 82 degrees Fahrenheit and stays there for around 12 hours each day. While at nighttime, the temperature drops to about 76 degrees for 12 hours. Note that I'm measuring the temperature on the ground of the cage, at the warm end. My cages have the heat panel on one side. I'm using these GoV devices to measure temperature and humidity in each cage. Well, let me correct that. I don't have a device in each cage, but where there's a small group of cages that are the same size and on the same thermostat, that I make sure to have at least one GoV in with one of those cages. Just about every species that I keep has some kind of a winter season. Because my part of the country gets very cold from December to February, I have the reptiles' winter correspond with my winter. You can see that in December I'm gradually dropping the daytime high from 82 Fahrenheit to 78 Fahrenheit. I'm also shortening the amount of time that the heat is on from 12 hours a day to 8 hours. I usually just drop the setting on the thermostat once per week by 1 or 2 degrees. Then at the end of the week I look at the GoV data to see where the DTH got to and decide if I need to drop it again the following week. This whole procedure is reversed in February when I bring the temperatures back up. And while the daytime high is being changed, so is the nighttime low. You can also see that for my carpet pythons, I'm increasing the humidity for several months. This is because in the wild, the cooler season for them corresponds to their rainy season. So I spray my carpets with a sprayer several times a week, and I get the humidity up, usually so that it averages 80% plus or minus 10% or so. And finally, for that top section, you can see that the lighting in the cage is also reduced. I have all my lights on simple household appliance timers, and I coordinate the timer for the 8 hours of light to happen at about the same time as the 8 hours of heat. For the bottom section of the chart, this is where I track food and my schedule for pairing the animals together. The pink bars are for females, the blue bars are for males. For carpet pythons, notice that generally the males are eating less than the females do during the year. You don't need thick, heavy males, so don't overfeed them. Notice that some of the prey sizes change during the year, as well as the frequency of the meals. You can also see that one of the pink bars for the female is darker pink than the others. This is a visual cue for me to remember that this is her heavy feeding time. Prey items are usually more plentiful at various times of the year in the wild, and the females take advantage of the abundant food and fill up. Doing this in captivity is believed to help trigger the female's reproductive cycle, so I do my best to do this. You can also see that for carpet pythons, I check to see if the female wants to eat an occasional meal during her winter season. This can also help trigger the female's reproductive cycle, so it's important to do. And notice that I don't do this for the male. He's fasting, and hopefully he's locked up with her as often as possible. For pairing the animals, I typically put the male in the female's cage. For a few species, I have to make sure they don't fight and kill each other, so I do it early enough in the evening so that I can keep an eye on them for several hours before I leave the room for the night. When it comes to feeding while the animals are paired, note that I never feed the animals when they're in the same cage together. I always pull the male out, put him back in his normal cage, feed them both separately, and I may not feed the male at all. Then I wait a day or two before returning the male to the female's cage. When I say keep them together until the female is gravid, I admit that for some snakes, it can be difficult for me to tell when they're gravid. But I found that if I come into the room and she is sitting on a pile of eggs, or if there are baby snakes crawling around the cage with her, then that tends to indicate that she was in fact gravid. I checked on the snakes that I've been cooling down briefly, just to make sure they were looking healthy and that they had clean water. This took place earlier in February when I was bringing up the temperature in the room where these containers are being kept. I should have considered that at a warming, ramping up temperature of 65 degrees, Malice would be awake and alert. I mean, 65 is not that uncommon as a normal temperature for these guys. Malice decided to release 3 months of pent-up anger and frustration and whatever else it is that she keeps up her cloaca, and she sprayed the stuff all over me while I was filming this. An hour later, after she'd been removed and the place was cleaned up as best as I could get it, you could still smell the musk. In fact, there were parts of new cages that had recently been painted with enamel paint nearby, and the musk smell overpowered the enamel. That's the power of a stinking goddess. Anyways, I hope some parts of this were interesting and maybe you got some new ideas for how to manage your own collection of snakes. I'm always looking for ways to improve my own practices, so if you have any suggestions, please let me know. But this wraps up some of the craziness that goes on around here in February, along with the ups and downs. Like I said, I'm very sad about the condition that Blister is in again. He's such a beautiful little guy, and it hurts to think about the pain he is in. I'll be sure to give any update I can on him in the future. I'm also in the middle of building another stack of cages to go in one of the corners of the room. These are about 5 feet wide by 2.5 feet deep. My boas and Chinese king rat snakes need these. And in fact, as soon as the first stack of 5-footers is done, I'll have to start on a second stack of them. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching. I really appreciate the support and the comments I've been getting. See you next time.